One, two. Is this on? Welcome to another answer to the age-old question of, do you know what really burns my ass? The evolution of comic books in related media. This isn't so much a rant as a prelude to more conversations to come. I have been asked to make sure I define terms before using them, so here we go. The first set of terms I wanted to go over are ranks of superheroes. These aren't power level, but popularity. I talked about this last week, if you haven't seen it. The next set of terms I want to define involves the different eras of comic books. Superhero comics in specific have gone through different eras that generally describe their tone as well as what sort of society created them. While the name of the most recent era is still undetermined, much like the name of the current society generation, the others are established and generally agreed upon. In short, there's the Golden Age of comics, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Dark Age, the Heroic Age, and now we're in the Modern Age, which is just the general term for whatever's coming out currently. Once upon a time, the Bronze Age was called the Modern Age, for example. Obviously, the Golden Age of comics dates back to the first comics. There is actually some debate as to what the first comic was, however. Some people agree that the first publication of Superman in Action Comics #1 in 1938 is the start of the Golden Age. But some people argue that Funnies on Parade, published in 1933, is the start because that book established the format that comic books would follow for decades to come. The Golden Age gained popularity as the U.S. was considering entering World War II and during the war. Many superheroes, including Superman, Wonder Woman, and Captain America, were used as patriotic propaganda at the time. It's important to know that the famous debut of Captain America, punching Adolf Hitler on the cover, was published before the U.S. entered the war. The Golden Age began its decline in the early 50s with the publication of Dr. Frederick Wortham's book Seduction of the Innocent and the U.S. congressional hearings that followed. I'm going to do a full dive into that sometime coming up. The Silver Age then began with Showcase Issue 4, 1956. This presented a new Flash to the comic book scene. This was Barry Allen, who is still generally considered to be the Flash. It was his version of the character who starred in both of his live-action TV shows and all of the movies that the Flash has appeared in. Due to the Comics Code Authority, which was born out of the mentioned congressional hearings, comics leaned away from being anti-crime and having the horror themes of the Golden Age. I'll probably also do a video on the Comics Code Authority later. Most important thing to know now is that one of its goals was to kill the comic book company EC Comics, and it succeeded. Without the authority, the big two of DC and Marvel would not have been able to solidify their position the way that they did in the Silver Age. Now, some people consider the start of the Silver Age to be the publication of Fantastic Four #1, 1961. That's 5 years after the debut of Barry Allen. And this is a fair boundary, but it ignores the 5 years after the Golden Age ended. And also, since the tone of the Silver Age is agreed upon as one of science fiction, space travel, and aliens as monsters, as opposed to the more prevalent magic and supernatural themes of the Golden Age, DC characters such as Flash, Green Lantern, and the Atom fit more in the Silver Age than in some vague purgatory in between. The Bronze Age also has some wiggle room as to when it began. Depending on if you're following Marvel or DC, Bronze Age had more mature stories, more real-world issues, and socially relevant themes. This is when mainstream media started to feature stories that began with the phrase, "Bam, sock, pow, comic books aren't just for kids." Seriously, I saw this exact headline in print and even on the TV show 2020, repeated all through the late 70s and 80s. So most comic book fans and historians consider the death of Spider-Man's girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, to have kicked off the Bronze Age in 1973. That was in Amazing Spider-Man 121 when Green Goblin threw Gwen off a bridge, and, well, there are different interpretations. Goblin claims that the shock of the fall killed Gwen before Spider-Man's web reached her. This was a popular myth of the time. Even some medical experts believe that if a person accidentally fell from a great height, the person's brain would protect itself by killing the body, thus avoiding the inevitable pain of landing. We now know this isn't true, but it was believed at the time, and Goblin claimed it was what killed her in the text of the book. On the other hand, the original printing includes a controversial snap sound effect written near Gwen's neck when Spider-Man's web catches her leg. This has led many to think Spider-Man inadvertently killed her while trying to save her. Either way, her death is largely considered to start the tonal shift into the Bronze Age. Now, some fans, on the other hand, point to DC's story Crisis in Infinite Earths from 1985, over a decade later, to kick off the Bronze Age. This story featured the deaths of popular characters Supergirl and The Flash, as well as others. Personally, I think this ignores the solidly Bronze Age DC stories that came before Crisis, such as the Green Lantern Green Arrow series that dealt with racism, public protests, government corruption, and even drug addiction. So while the break between the Golden and Silver Ages saw a change in characters, the Silver and Bronze Ages were divided more by story content and theme. As such, some individual titles made the jump before others. And this is where the divides get even more controversial. There are a lot of fans who label a specific period the Dark Age of comics, and there are just as many fans, at least as far as vocal recognition is concerned, who say this never happened and it was just more Bronze Age material. Starting in the late 80s, with the publication and popularity of Watchmen, a mature audiences only 12-issue, out of continuity story published by DC, and going all through to the early 2000s, comic books had a distinctly different tone. They focused more on art than story, they focused more on spectacle and sales than ever before, and they even marketed toward non comic book readers, with so called experts declaring this title or that issue to be a surefire monetary investment for the future. See, what happened is in 1992, Action Comics made headlines because issue number 1 sold at auction, Sotheby's auction if I remember correctly, for $82,000. This caused people who had no interest in comic books to suddenly take an interest. $82,000 meant this was no longer a throwaway toy for children, it was a potential monetary investment. So while the creators of comic books were looking at the success of Watchmen and learning all the wrong reasons from it, bankers and financiers were looking at comic book companies as potential market investments, knowing nothing of its creative process or its target audience. Worse, those bankers didn't care about the creative process or target audience. So Watchmen became the first comic book to never exit publication, and everyone tried to recreate it. Generally, Watchmen was an intentional deconstruction of the superhero idea, thrust in the gritty realism in a fictional world. That was a lot. I don't have time here to do it justice. I promise more to discuss this later, as it really does deserve its own video. Basically, just understand that in trying to repeat its popularity, other comic book writers and editors managed to copy pretty much everything about it except what made it popular. So we have editors and management pushing stories to be more like what they perceived Watchmen to be, all while people above them are buying and selling companies and properties like trading cards. Because Watchmen came out in 1986 and Barry Allen's death in Crisis was 1985, and a lot of people wanted the Bronze Age to start with Barry's death instead of Gwen's death, these people can't bring themselves to acknowledge the existence of the Dark Age. Dark Age, again, recognized by tone, the same way the Silver and Bronze Ages were. This tone was one of hyper-graphic violence, psychological trauma, and morally gray anti-heroes. It's also identifiable by the collector's bubble, which saw people buying dozens to hundreds of key issues, hoping to resell them decades later for money. Unfortunately, buying so many tipped the supply side of supply and demand so far, those collectors ensured those issues would never be worth anything at all. And when the bubble finally burst in 1997, this caused the end of a number of comic book companies, most of whom were bought by others. Valiant and Malibu were bought by Marvel. Wildstorm was bought by DC. This era also saw comic book properties really get involved in TV and movies in a way that they'd only kind of played with before. The biggest criticism of the Dark Age is that many characters and even stories appeared to be told not because the writer had something to say, but because of how that character or story could be later licensed and sold. The Heroic Age is the only age intentionally created with planning and intent. In 2010, Marvel published a crossover event called The Heroic Age that intentionally shifted focus from internal struggles and motivation deconstructions to instead promote team unity, external conflicts, and more classic adventure storytelling. DC followed this in 2011 with Flashpoint. In this story, Flash uses his time travel ability to change the timeline. The resolution of this created an all-new continuity called the New 52, in which DC promised to publish exactly 52 issues a month. This lasted until 2016, so 5 years, because many fans were very upset that the stories they had been following since Crisis in the 80s suddenly went away. But DC were afraid to lose the fans they gained with the reboot. This led to a story called Rebirth, which attempted to merge the post-crisis continuity with the New 52, keeping the best parts and eliminating parts that creators or fans were vocally upset with. Meanwhile, over at Marvel, a story called Secret Wars came out in 2015, based on reconciling their increasingly convoluted timeline. This story, like Rebirth over at DC, attempted to keep stories and characters from different continuities and merge them all into one. Specifically, as an example, the Miles Morales Spider-Man was incorporated into the default universe, for those of you who may have seen Into the Spider-Verse. Again, I've gone longer than intended, but in my defense, laying this groundwork now will prevent me from time-sink digressions going forward. I believe that now if I say some people consider the start of the Silver Age to be the creation of B-ranked character The Flash, you'll now know what I mean. If there's anything I skipped over that you want me to make more clear in future videos, please leave a comment below. Also, while there are specific stories I intend to talk about, which is why I made these groundwork videos in the first place, if there are any you want to hear my opinion on, let me know. I'll be glad to talk about it.